There is a manhunt underway in Southern California, and OJ Simpson, the 46-year-old former football star and one of America's best-known personalities, faces the possibility of the death penalty.
June 17th, 1994. OJ Simpson is on the run from police in one of the most famous car chases in history, wanted for murder.
The body of 34-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, ex-wife of OJ Simpson, was found after midnight on the sidewalk outside her West Los Angeles home. Next to it, the body of an unidentified 26-year-old man. Both had apparently been stabbed.
Despite OJ being arrested and tried for the murders, after 8 months in what became known as the trial of the century, OJ was acquitted. Even after extensive forensic police investigations, no one has ever been found guilty in a criminal court of these horrendous crimes.
Autopsies, by their nature, are the hard, cold, brutal facts of why and how someone died. This is the coroner's report into this incident, and it tells us that we've not got one homicide to investigate, but we have, in fact, two people who were brutally killed in exactly the same way. And now there's evidence that suggests that someone other than OJ Simpson could be responsible for these savage murders.
Dr. Richard Shepard has been performing autopsies for the last 25 years, including being an expert witness into the death of Princess Diana. Many of the autopsies he has conducted have been on the victims of murder.
As a forensic pathologist dealing with murders, I have to use all of the information at my disposal, and I call this the forensic triangle. First, we have the autopsy. Second, we have the police evidence. The third point on the forensic triangle are the crime scene photographs. In working through these three elements, we can begin to crack the puzzle of the days and hours leading up to these terrible crimes. I have here the detailed autopsy report of Nicole Brown Simpson that detail a gruesome and sustained attack. There are multiple stab wounds, including a 5-inch incised wound to the front of her throat, which gaped 2.5 inches wide and cut right down to the front of her spine. And it's these injuries that are the starting point of my forensic investigation into these killings.
"6:30 a.m., 12th of June, 1994, Los Angeles, California. 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson is up and out on her regular 9-mile run. 2 years ago, OJ and Nicole had separated after 7 years of marriage. They had 2 children together, Sydney, who's now 8, and Justin, who's 5. Since the divorce, there have been several attempts at reconciliation, but with no success. After being married to one of the best-known celebrities in America, it's taken time for Nicole to rebuild her life.
She had 2 kids. Like all these women had like nurses and things. She would not have a nurse. She took those kids out. She took them to their karate classes, their dance classes, whatever it was. She did it herself. She was well known for that.
Nicole was 35 years old, and the autopsy report shows that she was in really good physical shape. She was about 5.5 feet tall. She weighed 129 pounds, which meant that her BMI was spot on in the low 20s. All of the internal organs were healthy. They were normal size and normal weight. The only scars that were present were small scars beneath each breast, and the autopsy report shows that breast implants were present.
Growing up in California, a stone's throw from the beach, Nicole was the homecoming princess of Darna Hills High School. At 18, she left home, got a job as a waitress, and moved in with best friend David LeBon.
She was just a very, very down-to-earth kind of gal, and fun, and I don't know how else to describe her. Just wonderful, just a wonderful person.
But her world turned upside down in June 1977, when one of America's best-loved celebrities walked into the private dining area of the Daisy Club.
She said, I met this gentleman, and he's a football player, and his name's OJ Simpson.
For the waitress and the all-star former American footballer, the attraction was instant and intense. Despite OJ still being married at the time, from the moment they met, they became inseparable.
As a couple, they were a lot of fun. You know, they would invite us, you know, to a lot of their little parties, dinner parties, and it was just fun watching them.
At 46, OJ's running back days were a thing of the past. But since retiring from the game, he had carved out a very successful career as an American football commentator and movie star. An incredibly charming man, he was now worth millions, and his star was in the ascendant. To the outside world, the Simpsons may have projected a united front, but from the very first date, her close friend and roommate, David, feared that this was not a normal relationship.
I noticed her pants were ripped, and I said, well, what happened? And then she said, well, he was just a little bit forceful. And I said, well, why did you let him get a little bit forceful? I mean, that's your first date. She goes, David, I think I really like this guy.
Almost all of the injuries that were discovered at the post-mortem were related to the murder, but there was one injury that was caused before her death. Looking through the details of the autopsy, it shows that Nicole has an abrasion above her left scapula. That's the shoulder blade in the upper back. This is a red-brown injury 3/4 by 1/2 inch in size. This abrasion to Nicole's back showed that she'd sustained a blunt trauma injury to her back sometime, possibly a considerable time before her death. And I can categorically say it was due to physical force, and it may have been caused by being pushed or by being struck.
And Nicole was no stranger to trauma. As the relationship grew, OJ's aggressive behavior grew with it. After just 1 year together, on Nicole's 19th birthday, she told a friend that he punched her in the face, then felt so bad about it, he bought her a car.
She had a special concealer that she'd gotten from a makeup artist here in Hollywood that she would wear, you know, over bruises and marks and cuts. It was that normal for OJ to beat her up regularly, and I mean beat her badly.
Despite the beatings, Nicole Brown became Nicole Brown Simpson on the 2nd of February 1985. 3 years into the marriage, police had been called to the Simpson house 7 times, but no charges were ever pressed. Then, on the 1st of January 1989, after a New Year's Eve party, the violence escalated up a notch. At 3:58 a.m., police were called to the house with Nicole shouting, "He's going to kill me." She had a cut lip, a swollen black eye, bruised cheek, and a handprint on her neck.
She says, if you could come by the house when you get off work, you know, I got stuff I got to talk to you about. And I said, okay. And I went by there after work. And I was there for about 4 hours. I saw bruises on her face, you know, and she had makeup trying to cover it up.
Other than the blunt injury to her back, I'm very surprised not to see more evidence of old injuries to Nicole as someone who suffered long-term domestic violence. The autopsy report does, however, reveal marks on the inner and outer aspects of the right scapula, the right upper back. But these marks were caused post-mortem, or after death. For Nicole to have got those big red abrasions in the middle of her shoulder blade, I think the following must have happened. Once she'd been killed and was lying on the ground in that warm Los Angeles evening, insects, like ants, found her and did what they would always do in the natural world with something dead: attack the carcass.
June 12th, 1994. OJ Simpson has been out early for his regular game of golf. Nicole, meanwhile, has been out shopping. Their 8-year-old daughter, Sydney, has a dance recital later in the day, and proud mum has been out buying gifts for when it's over. At 2:18 p.m., after finishing his game, OJ calls her from the club. A waitress at the club later recalled it being a heated exchange.
I'm sick of it, Nicole.
To this day, nobody knows what the argument was about. But less than 12 hours later, Nicole Brown Simpson would be dead. Now, with the help of the autopsies of the 2 victims, Forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Shepherd is unlocking the secrets in the reports and digging up new information in a bid to find out who may have committed the crime and what really happened that night.
Forensic pathology is all about looking at all of the evidence that is presented to us within the forensic triangle. The evidence from the autopsy, the crime scene, and the evidence gathered by the police. And then putting all of this information together and making sensible deductions to reach non-judgmental conclusions. In the case of these two murders, we do have all this information, and putting these elements together, we should be able to form a full understanding of these two deaths.
6 p.m., Sunday, 12th of June, 1994. Nicole and OJ's daughter, Sydney, has just come off stage after performing in her Western-themed dance recital. Afterwards, OJ, who went to the event on his own, catches up with them as they leave, hoping to get a family photo. Nicole is in no mood to play Happy Families and whisks the children away to her favorite restaurant, Mezzaluna. They arrive at the restaurant at 6:30 p.m. Nicole and her children are joined by her mother, Juditha, Father Lou, two of her sisters, and several other family members. It's here that Nicole saw another friend, the man police later identified as the second body, waiter, Ron Goldman.
Ron's autopsy reports he was in very good shape for a 25-year-old, 5'9" tall, weighing 171 pounds. That means his calculated BMI is slightly in the overweight category at 25.2. However, if you consider his fitness regime and the knowledge that muscle weighs more than fat, this is likely to be due to fitness rather than obesity. This is a strong, powerful man in the prime of his life. We know that he trained in karate, and we would expect that in a fight, he would at least be able to defend himself.
As the evening continued in Mezzaluna, Sydney's triumphant performance earlier on wasn't the only thing they were celebrating. They were also congratulating Nicole on her newfound independence. In the 2 years since Nicole had divorced OJ, there had been several unsuccessful attempts at reconciliation, including holidaying together in Mexico.
Why? I mean, why would you ever want to go back to somebody that has abused you like that? I mean, I just don't understand that.
You get this can't live without dynamic, but I think it's often as an attempt to make it work, where one person is really hopeful that they can get that magic back, but ultimately decides, you know what, it's not working, we're never going to get back what we had, and ends it, and that's what Nicole did.
Despite still communicating with OJ about their kids, Nicole had been enjoying an independent life for the first time in 17 years. And it wasn't long before rumors started to spread that she was living the party lifestyle. According to friends at the time, she was free and she wanted to live again.
After they broke up, the divorce happened, she was going out and having some party time. She was taking drugs, there's no question about it. She was enjoying herself, she was having fun, and she was part of the scene.
With that renewed confidence and having that renewed identity and strength and sense of self, she may have also projected sexual confidence, ready to go and date other guys.
According to a close friend, Nicole's final weeks were a tawdry mix of sexual experimentation and possible drug use. She was, her friend said, leading a dangerous life.
According to newspaper reports at the time, she was supposed to be using cocaine. However, looking at the autopsy report, I can see no evidence to support that. However, this was a murder post-mortem examination, and it's possible that the nasal septum, the part that's so often damaged in chronic cocaine use, wasn't examined in full detail. But we do know that a full toxicology analysis was requested and was performed. And although we've not actually seen the report, in his evidence under oath at the trial, the coroner stated that no alcohol and no drugs were detected in the samples taken from Nicole.
It's now 7 p.m. and Nicole and her family have been in the restaurant for 30 minutes. Although she had known Ron Goldman for some time, over the last 6 weeks their relationship had started to become increasingly close. They'd been exercising together, out clubbing, and often met up for coffee and dinner.
She adored Ron. She thought he was really cute. Like, you know, people do, men and women. They may be friends only, but there's always that little element of, well, you know, something could happen, who knows? And things change from day to day. Somebody looked a little more attractive another way on one day or another. But she said that there was never anything going on between them except that they adored each other. But that was it. There was no sex.
8:30 p.m. Nicole and her family finish their meal and head off home. But as they reach the car, her mother, Juditha, accidentally drops her glasses in the gutter. Back home an hour later, Nicole calls the restaurant to ask if they've found the glasses.
Hi, it's Nicole.
Ron Goldman picks up the call.
Ron was still there, I guess, talking to the staff, friend of his. And he said, oh, you know what, I'll just take them by. I'll take them by our house. I'll take them down to Bundy, where Nicole lived. Wasn't that far. So Ron takes the glasses and he goes down to Bundy.
Approximately 9:50 p.m., Nicole tucks her children, Justin and Sydney, into bed for the very last time. Approximately 45 minutes later, Nicole will be dead. At 10:10 p.m., after the kids are settled in their beds, Nicole runs a bath. At some point over the next 15 minutes, the killer enters the property and hides in the shadows. Approximately 10:15 p.m., and Nicole hears the entrance gate buzzer go. Expecting Ron, she heads downstairs and out to the front of the house. Once outside, she reaches the bottom of the steps. But all is silent on South Bundy Drive, and Ron Goldman is nowhere to be seen. Then the attacker jumps out of nowhere, and within seconds has Nicole on the ground. At around 10:20 p.m., Ron Goldman arrives. He rushes the attacker, but the assailant manages to strike out with a knife, sending Ron backwards. Once on the ground, the attacker repeatedly stabs Ron Goldman until he is lifeless. The assailant then returns to Nicole and viciously attacks her again, before disappearing into the night. Two hours later, and their bodies are found by neighbors.
South Bundy Drive is now a forensic crime scene. And as the minutes and hours tick away, the blood, hair, tissue, and DNA are degrading. And the police need to retrieve and process this evidence as quickly as possible to give them the greatest chance of catching the killer and gaining a successful conviction.
The body of 34-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, ex-wife of OJ Simpson, was found after midnight on the sidewalk outside her West Los Angeles home.
I got one of the first calls, and I can't remember who called me, but they said that Nicole is dead.
Nicole had multiple stab wounds to her body, and her head was almost completely severed.
Next to it, the body of an unidentified 26-year-old man.
Ron had even more stabbing injuries and a very unusual wound to his left thigh.
When Nicole died, I was in a bank getting funds, and my pager went off. I looked at the pager, and it was my mother. And I got a little nervous, and I asked the bankers, hey, can I use your phone? Used their phone, I called, and Mom goes, honey, I'm watching TV, and they just said that OJ Simpson's ex-wife was murdered.
I cried, I cried. I mean, it was so hard for me. I loved her. I mean, it was like losing a little sister.
By interpreting the findings in the autopsy, I can determine the precise sequence of the stabbings and understand exactly what happened when and how. Now I aim to get a pattern of the killings and to build a forensic profile of the murderer.
On June the 12th, 1994, 2 murders were committed at 875 South Bundy Drive, Los Angeles. Despite American football legend OJ Simpson standing accused of the horrific killings, Simpson was acquitted, and to this day no one has ever been caught and found guilty in a criminal court of these brutal and vicious attacks. Dr. Richard Shepard has been poring over the autopsy reports and the forensic pathology of the crime scene, trying to piece together and unravel the events of that terrible night.
The autopsies are the window into these killings. But as we bring in other factors like the evidence from the police, the crime scene photographs, we begin to build up a full picture of what happened during those 2 hours between 10 p.m. and midnight on June the 12th, 1994.
"12:10 a.m. It's approximately 2 hours after the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Their bodies lay undiscovered until Nicole's dog, Cato, leads a neighbor to them and the police are called. Local LAPD arrive at the scene. They start to cordon off the area. Lead detective Tom Lang arrived soon after.
I got a call about 3 a.m. and I responded and got there about 4:30, 4:40 that morning. It was still dark. The entire street of Bundy had been taped off.
Having been involved in over 200 homicide cases during a 26-year career, as soon as Tom Lang stepped onto the crime scene, he could see things didn't add up.
The front door is wide open. There's candles on inside, music. This is a woman dressed in a kind of a slinky dress. She's barefoot. She still had jewelry on. She had rings, earrings, a wristwatch. There's no forced entry that we could see, so robbery is ruled out, burglary, maybe an assault.
Before analysing the autopsies, my first priority is to see a site plan of the house. The crime scene is the courtyard of 875 South Bundy Drive, which is a confined space. There is one entrance via an intercom security system, which is located at the top of a flight of steps by a metal security gate. In the courtyard, there's a tall tree, and the lighting is minimum with a patio round the corner. The shadows would have been very deep, and it's possible for the killer to have hidden in any of these places. Nicole came out of the house and down the steps at approximately 10:15 p.m. expecting to see Ron, who she thought had buzzed the gate. However, as she went down the steps, the killer appeared. The first 2 injuries she received were blows to the back of the right side of her head, which suggests she'd already turned round and was making her way back to the house and away from her assailant. But they also found evidence of skin beneath her fingernails and a cut on her left ring finger, which suggests that she may well have attempted to defend herself. I think it's very likely that the force of those injuries knocked her to the ground. As she falls, she hits the wall behind her, causing a bruise on the right-hand side of her head. And as she's lying face down on her right-hand side, there's another stab on the left-hand side of her head above her ear. It cuts in about 1.5 inches between the scalp and the skull. It's a non-fatal injury. What follows then are critical injuries are 3 linked stab wounds in a row to the left side of her neck. These are important because underneath them are the major blood vessels, the carotid artery and the jugular vein, that pass up to the brain. The first one tracks into the neck for a distance of 1.5 inches. The second one is slightly more superficial, going into the neck for a slightly shorter distance, about 1 inch. The third stab wound, which is closest to the front of the neck, goes in for a distance of between 1.5 and 2 inches. The combination of these 3 injuries, even without anything else happening to Nicole, is highly likely to have been the cause of her death. The wounds are focused in a highly concentrated area. These are not the pattern of wounds I would expect to see from someone who had simply been disturbed, say a burglar. They are the pattern of injuries I would expect to see where someone has one motive in mind, and that is to kill Nicole Brown Simpson. In my opinion, this is a premeditated murder. But the savage killer didn't know what was going to happen next. We know that Ron must have entered the scene through the gate. His immediate response would have been to have gone and tried to protect her, to help her. And in doing so, he would have begun to attack the assailant. The photographs of Nicole show that there are blood spots on her back. Sometimes a knife, when it's taken out of a body, will still have some blood upon it that may drip or spray as the knife is moved. I don't think that the drips on Nicole's back have been formed in this way. I think they've been caused by bleeding from an injury that has been caused to Ron. He has some superficial incised injuries to his hand, and these are typical of what are called defensive injuries. The assailant is now being attacked by a fit, young, 25-year-old karate-trained man, and is likely to be on the defensive themselves. What then may have turned the tables in this situation? The autopsy report and the scene photographs show that Ron has a stab wound to his left leg. The position of that wound is unusual and suggests that maybe Ron was kicking out in a karate kick when he was stabbed. He staggers back towards a fence where he's trapped, and the assailant is now in control. And as Ron is in that narrow space, the assailant stabs him multiple times.
These were 2 horribly brutal murders, blood everywhere, 2 people who were slaughtered in this small, cramped area. They had nowhere to go.
In the course of this sustained attack, Ron receives 4 fatal injuries. First injury is the one to the left-hand side of the neck. It cuts through the internal jugular vein, the main vein of the left side of the neck, penetrates deeply, reaching the base of the skull. It's a stab wound to the lower side of the abdomen, and there are also 2 injuries to the right side of his chest. They cut through the ribs, they penetrate into the lungs, and they cause considerable hemorrhage into the chest cavity. With the pattern of these injuries, it's clearly an offensive attack. The wounds seem random, meaning that the killer was desperate to get in any injury that would fight off this unexpected assailant. When he's sure that Ron is no longer a threat and is probably going to die, he returns to Nicole's body and he performs the coup de grace. He cuts her neck from left to right, cutting through the already damaged blood vessels on the left side of her neck, cutting through her larynx, her airways, and cutting through the blood vessels on the right-hand side of her neck. This injury is so deep that it cuts down to the spine and results in Nicole Brown Simpson bleeding out as she lies at the bottom of the steps.
It's the morning after the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson. She has now been dead for 9 hours. Police have finally put a name to the second body at the scene, Ron Goldman. And the evidence is starting to pile up. A bloodied left-handed glove, a black woolen cap, footprints that don't match the victim's, and a blood trail leading away from the house.
big problem we had with the crime scene initially on Bundy Drive was it's a major thoroughfare for traffic going between Santa Monica and Wilshire Boulevards, which are two very busy streets in the West Los Angeles area, especially since within a few hours, couple hours, it's Monday morning, people can be going to work. Obviously, you hope media doesn't show up and helicopters don't show up so you can do your job and be left alone. But it didn't happen in this case, obviously.
As the hours tick by, the police are struggling to manage the situation and protect the crime scene.
The investigation and the management of a crime scene of any homicide is critical. In this case, the crime scene may have been managed in pretty much the way it was normally done in 1994. But there's evidence of a rather lackadaisical approach because there is clear evidence of movement of people within the scene, addition of footprints, disturbance of the blood, and fibres. All of these things degrade the quality of the evidence that can be obtained.
We're tired, we're trying to put things together, the media's all over this, the brass is on this, you're getting pressure from here, pressure from there, what's going on?
And of course, this drew a huge crowd, a lot of reporters. Some of these bloody footprints might have been reporters or passersby. When two people get killed on a busy street, in a busy city with a lot of attention, there's potential for contamination.
Two Los Angeles newspapers are reporting that police have damaging evidence linking OJ Simpson to the murder of his ex-wife.
11 a.m. LAPD officers urgently want to speak to OJ Simpson about the murders. They drive over to his house on North Rockingham Avenue. Hours earlier, down a side alley of the house, they found a brown right-handed glove similar to the one at the murder scene, along with drops of blood in his driveway.
Simpson told police he was in Chicago at the time of the killings. He arrived at the home 12 hours after the bodies were discovered. Police escorted him to the rear of the building, and a short time later, Simpson was seen in handcuffs. After a conference with Simpson's attorney, Howard Weitzman, Simpson was released from the cuffs and taken to police headquarters for questioning.
But after 3 hours of questioning, he was released without charge. 16th of June, 1994, 4 days after the murders. On opposite sides of Los Angeles, the funerals of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman take place.
Simpson emerged from seclusion Thursday to attend Nicole Brown Simpson's funeral. He was accompanied by their 2 young children.
But just hours after the funerals, the LA District Attorney announces he is charging OJ Simpson with 2 counts of murder. The next day, OJ goes on the run.
Mr. Simpson is a fugitive of justice right now.
What happens after that will go down in history as one of the most bizarre car chases ever.
Everybody says they've never seen anything quite like this.
After 2 hours of what is possibly the slowest car chase in history, OJ Simpson finally gave himself up. The 8-month-long court case that followed would prove to be the trial of the century.
Much of the evidence in court was believed to point directly to OJ Simpson's guilt. He was charged with murder, but at the end of his criminal trial, he was found not guilty. So nearly 20 years on, how can the forensic interpretation of these autopsy reports help us to identify anything more about the killer?
On the 23rd of January, 1995, OJ Simpson's murder trial began. Millions of Americans tuned in to follow every new twist and turn, and an estimated $25 billion was lost as workers turned away from their jobs to follow the trial.
From day one, we all knew this was going to be something unique and something really crazy. It was the biggest story, I think, that any of us had ever covered. Just a blur. So many developments, so many surprises, it almost became surreal at times.
Time now for them to reserve judgment and see the facts as they truly are.
You know, I'm like, man, nobody can get out of this. Not even OJ Simpson.
The evidence against OJ seemed overwhelming. A shoe print at the scene which matched one of his shoes. A bloodied left-hand glove, the right hand of which was discovered at his house. OJ's blood at the crime scene. Goldman and Nicole's blood in his car. And on one of his socks. But as the trial progressed, each piece of evidence was successfully demolished by the defense. The police had made many mistakes in collecting the evidence, leaving it open to contamination.
The gathering of evidence was a complete disaster. And we feel that the evidence will be shown to be contaminated, compromised, and corrupted.
These types of things can be exploited by the defense. These are little accidents, that little mistakes people make. Coroner didn't write it down, they didn't do what I asked, they got busy. You have to be able to understand that these things happen in all cases.
In court, evidence from the crime scene has to be pure and uncontaminated, otherwise it's not admissible. And that's what happened in OJ Simpson's trial.
The defense also argued that circumstantial evidence was not strong enough to reveal that OJ actually committed the crime, only that he could have. The most dramatic moment came when they asked OJ to try on the gloves found near his house and at the crime scene.
And the jury was shocked, and everybody was murmuring in the courtroom, and Johnny Cochran spawned the famous, "If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit."
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
When asked who committed the crime if OJ didn't, the defense came up with a different version of events. They argued that there were two killers, and that this was an execution by a drugs cartel linked to Nicole's recent use of cocaine. The severing of her head, they suggested, was actually a warning to others, known as a Colombian necklace.
But I believe that the evidence tells me that there weren't two killers. Crucially, there was only one set of footprints passing between Ron and Nicole's bodies. Added to that, samples of both victims' blood were found on Ron Goldman's shoes, indicating that they had mixed together. They dripped from a single weapon. So there was only one knife, and there could only have been one killer.
On October the 3rd, 1995, with more than 150 million Americans tuning in, the jury reached their verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187.
But to this day, many people, including Nicole and Ron's families, still believe OJ Simpson to be the murderer. However, there are a number of pieces of evidence from the autopsy and the crime scene that support Simpson's acquittal.
When the police started to collect evidence at the scene, they found tissue and blood beneath Nicole's fingernails. They also found drips of blood on her back, and neither of these matched either OJ Simpson or Ron Goldman. And when the LAPD processed the scene further, they found numerous unidentified fingerprints, some sources say up to 17, and a footprint in blood that was never matched to OJ Simpson. Lastly, the blood found in the car amounted to less than one drop, not enough to secure a safe conviction. Then there was the question as to whether Simpson was physically fit enough to kill two people, especially as Ron Goldman was a fit young man, and Simpson by this time was 46 and suffering from arthritis.
So who else might have committed these violent murders?
The ferocity of the killing suggests one of two things. Either the killer knew the victim very well, or it was a psychotic killing where the killer had observed her movements, watched her, and was in waiting.
Since the trial, two other suspects have entered the frame. Glenn Rogers, known as the cross-country killer, is a serial killer currently on death row for the murder of a number of women. In 2012, rumors started circulating that he had been partying with Nicole Brown Simpson leading up to her death. It was alleged that he had confessed to killing her to steal her jewelry as part of a planned robbery.
It's believed that Rogers suffers from a disease called acute intermittent porphyria. And this is a disease that can make the individual act in a very violent and psychotic manner.
So could Rogers be the killer?
One key piece of forensic evidence that meant that Glenn Rogers was most unlikely to be the killer. The investigators found a woolen hat at the scene that must have belonged to the murderer. And when it was examined in the laboratory, some afro hairs were discovered within it, similar to those of OJ Simpson. But these hairs were also similar to the 10% of the population of Los Angeles that had an Afro-Caribbean background.
But much closer to home, another suspect emerged, whose profile might fit the evidence generated by the forensic triangle.
We know from the fibers in the hat that the killer was either black or of mixed race. We know that he must have been strong because he was able to fight off a fit, well-built, 25-year-old man who was believed to be a karate expert. We know from the pattern of injuries that his intended target was Nicole and that Ron simply intruded into the scene and confused matters. And we know that he was an inexperienced hitman. He left a glove, he left a hat, and he left his footprints at the scene. It should have been easy to track down this man.
I would not, could not, and did not kill anyone. My father will have more to say.
Jason Lamar Simpson is the oldest son of OJ Simpson from his first marriage, a chef with convictions for drink driving and hit and run. At the time of the killing, he was on parole for violently attacking his employer. An ex-girlfriend said he had aggressively cut off her hair with a knife, and he was reportedly taking medication for a mental health disorder. On the night of the murder, it's believed that Nicole and her family were due to go to Jason's restaurant, but instead chose Mezzaluna. It's been suggested that for some reason this change of plan deeply angered Jason.
There was evidence at the crime scene that another person had been present. The individual whose tissues were under Nicole's fingernails was never identified. There were the unexplained footprints, and there were drips of blood that couldn't be identified as being either Nicole's or Ron's. Could this person be Jason Simpson?
Other theories have even placed OJ at the murder scene, arriving after the double slaying, suggesting he was willing to take the blame for his son. Neither Jason or OJ have ever commented on these speculations. However, there is no evidence to implicate Jason in this crime, either from the police investigation or the autopsy.
The final thing the autopsy tells us is that this killer, whoever he was extremely lucky. To have committed such vicious killings in a suburban neighborhood, to have left behind so much evidence and not to get caught is quite extraordinary. For Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, their luck could not have been worse. And if Ron had arrived just a few minutes earlier, it's quite likely that both of them would still have been alive today.
I loved her. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. And I really miss her. After 20 years, I miss her.